Hello and welcome to English 102's final project. My name is Aaron Ferguson and this report was done for Central Penn College. The title of my paper is LSD, the Forbidden Wonder Drug. My introduction starts off with, was it wrong to restrict access to LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, for almost 50 years? Baunton 2018 states that in 1970 the U.S. Congress placed LSD into Schedule 1 of the CSA, that's the Controlled Substances Act, indicating that the drug had high abuse potential and no currently accepted medical use except for research. My thesis statement. The Schedule 1 status of LSD is a problem because it restricts access to the drug by medical professionals who could ascertain its usefulness in treating mental disorders and other illnesses. This problem could be resolved by lessening the restrictions on LSD by reclassifying the drug as a Schedule 2 or 3 substance, while simultaneously encouraging or cooperating with research endeavors to pursue the drug's true potential. Statement of the problem. Since LSD is classified as a Schedule 1 drug, the regulations and time delays for working with it can be extensive. A lot of red tape when it comes to working with Schedule 1 drugs with the government. They're very selective, of course, of who they give access to that, and after 1970 it was pretty difficult. With research coming almost to a near standstill after 1970, the small group of qualified researchers who had dealt with the substance were unable to accurately ascertain the drug's potential within the defined medical boundaries of the day. They didn't have any. They were getting close to understanding it. They just couldn't understand it fast enough before the government had to lock down LSD. Nevertheless, many clinical researchers and patients who experienced the drug during the age of legal research reported that their experience with LSD was a positive experience in their lives. This first study was done by researchers in 2014 who had contacted Czechoslovakian researchers from the age of legal research, and all the ones that they could find reported that they had positive results with the drug back in that time. In a recent study conducted last year at the University of Basel, Switzerland, additional mental health professionals reported positive experiences with their patients, reaffirming the claims from over 50 years ago. This second study was done with LSD actually back in 2017, and the results published in 2018. And everybody that had taken the drug at that time had good things to say about it. And University of Basel, Switzerland. Basel, Switzerland is where Sandoz, the company that first manufactured LSD, was located. The background. Smith, Razwak, and Dickerson-Davis in 2014 state that LSD was created by Swiss chemist Dr. Albert Hofmann in 1938, with its amazing properties being discovered by Hofmann in 1943. And that is true. While working in his lab one day in 1943, some of it got onto, I believe, his hands while he was working with the substance, and he took his famed bike ride through Switzerland and started to experience the effects of LSD. LSD was deemed illegal in 1966, and in 1970 it was placed in the Schedule 1 classification of the Controlled Substances Act in an effort to control the drug's recreational use, heavily embraced by the counterculture of the 1960s. This is where most people become familiar with LSD, and that is with the 1960s San Francisco experience. We know this from movies. We've seen this it's in popular culture. Jimi Hendrix burning his guitar on stage under the influence of purple haze, which was manufactured by a chemist named Owsley Stanley. You have the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service, these San Francisco bands, tie-dyed T-shirts, things like that. Most people understand the drug from that time. That was probably the downfall of the drug and probably the worst thing that could happen to it, which got it out of the hands of medical researchers and into the hands of the public where it did not need to be. The U.S. government thought it in the best interest of the country at the time to completely ban LSD along with other Schedule 1 drugs out of fear of the ever-increasing 1960s counterculture. They effectively put a stop to all scientific and clinical research on these drugs. The counterculture was, pretty much as it says, they were counter to the culture. So they were a problem to the government. They were protesting the Vietnam War very heavily. And in 1970, that's when Kent State happened in May of that year. And Nixon had signed this into effect, that LSD was going to be placed on the Schedule 1 list within the CSA. Today, people are beginning to realize that psychedelics aren't the evil the U.S. government claimed them to be way back when, and new research is slowly starting on these drugs, as with the Schmidt and Lecce paper there, with the research happening in 2017-2018. Alternative solutions. Finding an alternative solution around the government restrictions is almost an impossibility. According to Bahnsen in 2018, LSD was becoming difficult to work with as early as 1963. The case of Rossman versus United States, 1966, demonstrated how researchers turned to illegal sources of LSD due to the difficulty in obtaining the drug. And they turned down these researchers in the Roseman case because they didn't believe, the government turned down these researchers because they believed they weren't qualified, and they were engineers in their backgrounds and not medical people. So I can see why they had turned them down for that, but at the same time, these people were trying to conduct legitimate research, but they just didn't do very well doing that. Another major obstacle associated with LSD is that it's such a bizarre drug. Sessa 2014 explains the complication involved with psychedelics, as they are unlike almost any other substances known to man, and that the medical community will need to think and act differently when evaluating and administering these drugs. Sessa goes on to address that modern medicine has too many entrenched practices to adequately adapt psychedelic research into its current ideology. Proposed solutions. The medical community will need to develop new parameters when assessing the use and benefits of LSD. LSD will need to be downgraded from a Schedule 1 drug to either a Schedule 2 or 3 drug with restrictions reduced for research. The U.S. government will need to assist with legitimate research efforts by qualified professionals. Consequences and benefits. Research could begin on LSD and multiple applications for its use could be determined. Damage to the pride of the U.S. government, foreign governments, and medical community could be substantial, with possibly some security problems in there as well. The 1960s were not a good time for LSD to appear on the U.S. stage with the ongoing Russian Cold War and the Vietnam War in progress, and the counterculture coming up against the Vietnam War. That's a whole other paper in itself, but the 1960s were a turbulent time, and this stuff comes on the scene, and the government just really wasn't ready for it, and society wasn't really ready for it, but it sure did hit the United States and the world by storm. It affected a lot of the popular culture at the time, the music and the children of that era, and because of it getting out of control, that is what the problem was. With restrictions easing on cannabis, a CSA Schedule 1 drug now legal for recreational use in 10 states, the District of Columbia, and Northern Mariana Islands, LSD may begin to find its way back into mainstream culture. My conclusion. In 1970, after failing to find any known medical use for LSD, its unreliability as a military weapon, and to thwart the rapidly increasing and antagonistic counterculture of the 1960s, the U.S. government decided to lock away LSD along with other psychedelic drugs by placing them in the Schedule 1 category of the CSA. LSD, along with a list of other drugs, have been excluded from further research by their Schedule 1 status for almost 50 years. They weighed out national security versus research and national security won. It's just what happened. Prior to the CSA of 1970, LSD researchers were experiencing positive results with their patients and through self-experimentation. Self-experimentation is where a researcher uses the drug on themselves to ascertain its effects. One of the things that they were trying to discover was the mental state of mental patients, or psychosis. So, which is like a brain disorder. So the researchers figured if they could take the LSD and experience this psychosis state, they could better understand their patients and then therefore treat them better. LSD has been gaining popular press, and new evidence has surfaced showing why it was deemed a Schedule 1 drug in 1970. My solution is to allow for ongoing research with LSD by medical professionals to determine the drug's usefulness. To accomplish this, the U.S. government will need to reduce or drop the Schedule 1 status of LSD and allow easier access to the drug for research. With cannabis now experiencing a very rapid acceptance rate within the United States, LSD and other Schedule 1 drugs may not be far behind.